Good morning, everyone. Thanks for coming to my talk. Hope you're having a fantastic conference so far. My name is Manu. I am a core contributor on Fastlane. I've been an iOS developer since iOS 4, and I've been a core contributor for the past year. So before we get started with the talk, let me ask for some statistics. So first of all, how many people here have heard of Fastlane? Just raise your hand. Okay, almost everyone. Very nice. How many of you actually use Fastlane? Okay, I would say half maybe. And how many of you are on a team where every single person on the team can release a build to your testers or to the App Store? That's like, okay, maybe 10, 15 people. So this talk will be for you. For everybody else, I mean, sorry. So before we actually get started, let's take a look at this screenshot. I took this screenshot on Fastlane's website, I think last Tuesday or something. But the important part here is this number. So in total, you guys in the back probably can't see it, but in total, Fastlane has saved over 10 million developer hours worldwide. And it's been out, I think, for 3 years or so. So that is a lot. But I thought, while preparing this talk, like, how can I make this number more approachable for you? So I thought about it, and I came up with this. Imagine you're in a small team with 3 developers that just pushes out app after app after app. And with an average development time of 18 weeks, I looked this up. Apparently, this is average development time. Fastlane, or like this team, would have released almost 5,000 apps today. So this should give you an idea of just how much time you can save when you've set up Fastlane. So before we get into setting up Fastlane, I want to talk a little bit about the app deployment process and the kind of problem that Fastlane is trying to solve. So this is basically what people think, like the average person thinks the deployment process looks like, right? You have an idea, something like, oh, I want to build the next Facebook. Then you do some development, maybe get some, design considerations in there. And then you're basically done, right? The app just magically appears on the App Store or on your testers' devices. And that's it. You can pop out the champagne and you're done. As many of you know, probably that's like not quite what happens. In reality, when deploying your app, you have to worry about these things, right? You have code signing, because Apple doesn't want to make it easy for people to run code on their devices. So you have things like code signing. And what do you need to do to actually sign your app? Well, you need to go to the Apple Developer Portal. You need to create your app. You need to create a signing certificate. And if you do it by the book, how Apple wants you to do it, every single developer needs to create their own signing certificate. So then, for each app, each developer needs to create a provisioning profile. The provisioning profile, you need to add all the devices. And that needs to be done for every provisioning profile. So there's just a lot of manual steps here that you need to go through that are ripe for human error, right? For example, somebody could add a new device, and their other developer forgets to download the new provisioning profile, or forgets to add the device to their provisioning profile. So ideally, we want to get rid of this. We don't want to do this. Next, we have screenshots, right? Once you actually want to submit your app to the App Store, Apple is asking you for screenshots. And they're asking you for up to 5 screenshots. And it doesn't sound like a lot, at least at first. But then you realize that is per device type. And currently, we have 7 device types. So that's 35 screenshots that you need to take per language that you support. And I think most of us here are bilingual or trilingual, so those are probably the number of languages that we want to support. So suddenly you're looking at almost 100 screenshots that you need to take, right? So even if it only takes you half a minute to take each screenshot, that's almost an hour of work every time you're updating your screenshots. And you want to update your screenshots often because you want to show your customers and people who are thinking about buying your app what the newest iteration of your app looks like and what your newest layouts look like. So that's an hour of work every time you want to do this. And then you have to actually build your app. So there's a lot of manual steps involved there too. For example, updating the build number, updating the version number. you need to actually build the app with the right settings applied in Xcode, right? You need to select the right provisioning profile, etc. And then you need to actually upload your app somewhere. So either to your beta distribution service or to iTunes Connect, sorry. So again, lots of manual steps that we would like to avoid. So let's talk about Fastlane. Fastlane is a command line tool that you can install on your Mac or your Linux device that automates these things. And I don't think it's very visible. But yeah, it's not good. This is what it looks like. So with Fastlane, we can define these lanes. And what a lane is basically is like a function that you can call from the command line. If you're familiar with other build systems, it's basically just like targets there. So we can write a simple lane like this that has these commands that automate all these processes that I talked about for us. So for example, we have one command that takes care of synchronizing our developer profile. And if I'm talking about developer profile, I mean your signing certificate and your provisioning profile and so on. We have a command that runs unit tests. We have a command that takes screenshots. We have a command that builds your app for the App Store or for test flight or whatever. And we have an app that uploads metadata and your built app to the App Store. So with this, you can very easily automate all these steps that are required to deploy your app. So now, let's look at what this configuration, oh damn. Yeah, that's not good. So what you would see here, I mean, I hope everyone can see at least the white lines. We're defining different lanes here. Like I said, a lane is basically like a function call. The only difference is that you can call it from the command line, and just like with a function call, you can call it from other lanes. So if you could read this, you would see that there's a lane that's called beta here. We're calling a different lane called sync codesigning here, and we're passing it parameters. And here's a lane that's called release, and we're calling again something else. If you could actually read it, something else that you would be able to see is that we have regular conditionals here and regular code, basically, over there. So another thing to note is that this configuration file format is basically just Ruby code. It's Ruby code that's extended with some syntactic sugar to allow you to build these deployment pipelines. Another thing, for example, here, the register devices and match, those are built-in functions that we have included in every install of Fastlane, and we call those actions in the Fastlane jargon. So let me talk about the most important built-in actions in Fastlane. So on the left side here, you can see all the built-in iOS functions, tools, and on the right side, you can see the comparable Android tools that we support. So those are the most important ones. There are many more, but let me just briefly go over these. So we have produce, which gets some metadata from your app and makes sure that it exists on iTunes Connect and on the Apple Developer Portal. You have deliver and supply, which take your app, take your metadata, take your screenshots, and it uploads them to the store or to TestFlight. We have Snapshot and Screen Grab, which, as you might guess from the name, they take screenshots. We have Scan, which runs unit tests, PEM, which generates your notification certificate that you need on iOS. We have Match, which we saw before, syncs developer profiles, and we have Gym, which builds your app with the right settings pre-selected. So let's look at how easy it is to set up Fastlane and to get up and running. So there are multiple ways you can install Fastlane. The easiest way, in my opinion, is to use Homebrew. So you would just type brew cask install Fastlane, and it'll do everything for you. It'll start downloading and installing immediately, and any additional steps it'll mention at the end. So this is a very simple way to install Fastlane. Another good thing about this is that it's completely isolated from your system. So if you've ever dealt with Ruby gems, you might know that you can have incompatibilities. There's also things like SSL certificates that you need to worry about. And this takes care of everything. So very simple to install. This is my recommended way to install Fastlane. So let's look at how to set up Fastlane in your project. And the way you do this is you just type Fastlane init. So in your project directory, type Fastlane init. You only need to give it your Apple ID, and it'll start auto-detecting your project settings and creating a configuration for you based on those settings. So again, very easy, very simple to get up and running with Fastlane there. And one of the things that you'll also see here is that Fastlane uses deliver to download all your metadata as a text file. And so you can actually commit your metadata, like title, description, release notes, etc., to your repository, which I think is very, very neat. Next, so once you've set it up like this, you have a very basic configuration of Fastlane. It only supports building your app, but we still need to take care of setting up screenshots and setting up the syncing of the developer profile. So let's look into how to do that. So to sync the developer profile, we use a tool called Match. So you might ask, how does this work? So like I said, when I talk about a developer profile, I mean certificate, private key, and provisioning profiles. Match takes these, puts it into a Git repository, a private one, and you provide it with a password. Match uses OpenSSL to encrypt all these things, the provisioning profiles, the private keys, etc., and puts it into this repository. So it also takes care of things like ensuring that all the provisioning profiles are valid. And yeah, one caveat is that you can only use it if since Match takes care of managing everything for you, you need to have at least one free certificate slot on the Apple developer portal. Because sadly, Apple limits you to creating 5 certificates, I think, in total. So you might not be able to use it in that case. Now let's look at how to set it up. It's just like with Fastlane. You go to command line, you go into your project directory, and you type Fastlane match in it. And that's really the only thing you need to do. You need to give it the Git URL, and it'll start setting everything up. And from that point on, you can start using Match. You just type Fastlane match, and then, for example, App Store, and we'll set up all the required things for you to sign your app for the App Store. So it'll create all certificates that are missing, it'll create all provisioning profiles, etc. Now, you might think that this is insecure, right? It's taking my private key and it's publishing it somewhere on a Git repository. But first of all, it's also encrypting your things with a password that only you know. And second of all, if you think about it, really, it's not any less secure than other methods people use. For example, I've seen people send their private key via email. I've seen people put it on a USB drive and carrying it around, you know. So it's not really any less secure than that. And you can use any Git repository, so you can even self-host, for example. And all that data never has to leave your premises. So that's Match. Next, Snapshot. Snapshot is the tool that we use to take screenshots. Now, Snapshot builds on top of Xcode UI tests. So if you're already using Xcode UI testing, then that's great. Snapshot is very easy to integrate. Once you run Fastlane Snapshot in it, it'll show you all the instructions you need. You just need to copy a file into your project, add some initialization code, and you're done. You can add the snapshot command at the places where you want to take screenshots in your UI tests. And if you're not using UI tests yet, That's also not a big problem because Xcode makes it very easy to set up UI tests. You just add a new UI testing target to your application, and then you can use the record function. So Xcode has a built-in record function. So you don't need to write any code. You just navigate in your app to the places where you want to take screenshots and insert the snapshot command there. So very easy to get up and running, extremely easy to set up. Now let's look at it. So yeah, as I said, you only type Fastlane snapshot in it. It shows you everything you need to do here, which you probably can't read. It also shows you the files it creates here. And one thing it doesn't mention, so if you want to set up Snapshot or Fastlane in your project, you need to edit this file, the snap file, which is the configuration file for Snapshot, because you need to set on which devices you want it to run and which languages you want it to create. So you edit this file, the snap file, and then you've set up Snapshot. So now we're done with setting up codesigning, taking up the screenshots, and everything else should work out of the box. So yeah, this is just how you run it. You just type Fastlane snapshot. It takes a long time to run since it boots up multiple simulators and runs your testing code, and it has to compile your app. But so we're not going to look at it. I want to show you what it does. You probably can't see it, but it prints out a table once it's finished running. So you can immediately see it lists all devices here that it ran on, and it lists all the languages it ran on here. And if there was an issue, it would print an X here. So you can immediately see, for example, if your app crashed or didn't manage to navigate to the right place with a certain language. And another very nice thing that it does is it creates an HTML preview that you see here, where it shows you for every device and every language how the screenshots look. So I know some people who use this as a way to prototype their layouts, because you can very, very easily see if the new screen that you built or the code changes that you made had any impact on any other language without having to manually boot up the simulator. So this is very nice. There's also a tool called Danger Device Grid, which actually posts a preview like this to pull requests that you make. So if you set that up, it's very, very, very cool. So yeah, we've set up everything now. So you can run Fastlane release after you've done these things. And if you could read it, you could see that it prints out a table here. There will be lots of output from all the tools that it runs. And this is all that's required, basically, to solve the problem we had in the beginning. So it takes care of codesigning. It takes care of running your unit tests, taking screenshots, building your app with the right settings, and uploading everything to the App Store. So like, it took me, on my test project, maybe 10 minutes to set up all these things. And now I want you to think about, like, how many releases can you do in 10 minutes? Probably none. So very quick. One more thing that I should mention is Deliver has a new feature that's been out, I think, for a couple of months. It's called pre-check, and it reads your metadata, and it automatically tells you if there's any issue with your metadata that could get you rejected. For example, it looks, one of the rules that a lot of people had issues with in the past is mentioning other platform names, right? If you mention Android in your device description or in your release notes, your app will get rejected. And Deliver now automatically checks for these things and tells you to fix these things. Yeah, so now that you've seen the basic setup, let's look into some other things that you can do with Fastlane. So these things that I've listed here are probably the most popular things that people use Fastlane for. You can just like automatically create release notes. You can work with version control like Git and Mercurial, and GitHub. It has a GitHub integration as well. You can integrate with lots of third-party crash reporting services and beta distribution services. and you can have it manage your devices and testers for you. And one of the very cool things is there's a tool called builtin, which is not part of the standard Fastlane installation, but is built on top of Fastlane. And what it does is, if you launch it, it creates a website for you that you can send out to people that they can use to sign up for being your test flight tester. So you just send them a link to the website, and they sign in with their email address, and they automatically get added to your test flight. So that's a very nice tool, I think. It was built in like a weekend on top of Fastlane. So yeah, and you can, if you want to get it install that, it actually has a Heroku button where you can instantly launch a new version of that app. And it takes one button and it's set up. It's really cool. So those are, like I said, the kind of most popular things that people use Fastlane for. There's many other things you can use it for. Fastlane has over 150 built-in actions, so over 150 different things that you can do. So whatever you want to do, whatever you want to use Fastlane for, like whatever your workflow is for deploying your app, it's very likely supported out of the box. And if it is not, Fastlane also supports plugins, and I just looked this up this morning. Currently there are 221 plugins for Fastlane. So whatever your workflow is, either it's supported out of the box, or it's very likely that somebody else has written an integration for it. So what happens if there is no integration for it? Well, Fastlane builds on top of this tool called Spaceship. Spaceship is an API client written in Ruby and available as a Ruby gem that basically, yeah, is an API client for the Apple Developer Portal, for iTunes Connect, and for the Xcode API that Xcode uses to communicate with the Apple servers. So if you want to write your own plugin for Fastlane, you will very likely need this gem. And yeah, you can see this. Okay, so one nice thing about this is it's very easy to prototype because you can run Fastlane Spaceship. It'll log you into these services, and it'll launch you into a console where you can actually explore the API. So you can very simply, using tab completion, for example, type spaceship.app. And then tab, and find everything that you can do, find out everything you can do with those things. So it's very easy to set up, very quickly to prototype plugins and to create your own plugins. And the thing I was talking about before, builtin, the thing that is a website where people can sign up to test flight. As I said, it was built in a weekend. It was built on top of Spaceship, so that should give you an idea, basically, how quickly you can build plugins with this. So that's more or less as close as we're getting to that ideal that we saw before, right? You have development, you have an idea, you do some development, and then you let Fastlane automate everything. Sadly, there's no way around doing these things, but we can automate them. And yeah, if you set this up, everyone on your team, even if you get a new employee or whatever, you're trying to set up someone new on your team, can issue a new release immediately. So hopefully once you've set up Fastlane, then more of you will have a team where everyone can issue a release. Yeah, one thing I should mention is if you want to set up Fastlane in your projects, I would recommend you go to docs.fastlane.tools. It is documentation, and I know some people are very anti-reading documentation because it's often very hard to understand, you know, API documentation, all the parameters, whatever. This is not the case for the Fastlane documentation. It is really good. It has detailed setup guides for all these things that I talked about, for the most popular workflows. It has a list of all the actions and all parameters for each action, best practices, advanced usage instructions, etc. It's very comprehensive, very easy to understand, and it's written from the perspective of a user who is trying to set up Fastlane in their project. One more thing I should probably mention is that Fastlane not only supports iOS and Android, it also supports cross-platform technologies like React Native, Xamarin, Ionic, etc. And yeah, a lot of these are supported as plugins. So on docs.fastlane.tools, there is a plugin directory with all the 221 plugins that we have now, where you can see each and every plugin and read a description of it. So you can find basically everything you need there. Yeah, that's it. That concludes my talk. I've put up my contact information here, so if you have any more questions and don't manage to catch me here, feel free to ping me. Yeah, I should also mention, basically all the sample code that you weren't able to read, it's taken from a blog post on my website, so you can check out my website. It's in my email address. And yeah, you should be able to read it there. So yeah, that's it.